I'm not going to say most improved yet, but he looks like a guy who's taking a big, big leap this year.
Well, looking at this roster, I mean, they definitely, from top to bottom, have chips on their shoulders after Kawhi left, and no one pegged them to do much of anything. And people forget how good a head coach Nick Nurse is. They still have battle-tested veterans like Lowry, like Gasol, like Ibaka, and Pascal Siakam, who's looked really good as the focal point of this offense so far. Van Vliet showed that he's not just a fluke, and last year was not a one and done for him. He looks like he's going to have a very long and promising NBA career. So the Raptors are going to be there. If they stumble, they still might end up selling off their assets. But look, it's October. We're not there yet. The Sixers, on the other hand, your Golden Boys, I mean, they're excellent defensively, and we don't see them being too good of a regular season team. I think that we're in agreement on that. They're going to win a lot of ugly games. And when I say ugly, poor shooting nights, grit and grind games, they're like the new Grizzlies. They're going to grind you down, and they're going to win ugly. And Sixers fans are going to see a lot of that. We're not going to see 25-point wins where they score 120 a night. It's just not going to happen right now. They're going to win, but they're going to win ugly.
I think the one thing there, though, that you may be underselling is Ben Simmons in transition. I mean, as a half-court player, he's one guy. But when you see him in transition, he's a totally different player. And one thing that's going to be really nice that I don't even know if we've seen to the full extent yet is they are going to get some turnovers this year with those long arms that they have all around their lineup. And that's going to turn into steals and live ball turnovers. And this is going to be a team that, if I had to guess, is going to be one of the better transition teams in the league this year. I think they're going to score a lot out of transition. And I think that's going to be the one piece that is going to be pretty interesting. And I think that because of that, you use the grit and grind. I see a little bit of those early LeBron James Heat teams where Spoelstra really had them focus in on defense and try to live in transition to avoid the half court a little bit, because at that point that was really before LeBron was much of a shooter. Bosh was still more of a traditional big man. And so they really tried to live in transition. I think that might be where their destiny is. They have some of the older guys in Embiid and Horford, but I think they might try and stagger those minutes. So that's the other thing I think to look for, is how much they run this year and kind of get out in transition.
Well, what about some of these other teams as we shift to the Western Conference that have gotten off to good starts? I mean, the Timberwolves, who I think have surprised everyone, 3-0 out the gate, and the Spurs, who have shown that they're the Spurs no matter what. I mean, are we buying the hype on these two teams? I'm going to say no. What do you think?
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. I think this is sort of a buy or sell portion of our show. Um, I I am not buying the Timberwolves. I'll start with the Timberwolves and say I'm selling. I'm selling on the Timberwolves.
100%.
Now, I think that they'll be better, and I think part of that is that Saunders has them shooting a lot of threes. And don't look now, but Andrew Wiggins, the much maligned Andrew Wiggins, Jason, one thing that is very, very noticeable when you watch Timberwolves games this year is he is taking an extra couple steps, Jason, and he seems to have figured out that 3 points are worth more than two. And so his 3-point attempts this year, I mean, they haven't exactly skyrocketed, but they are up from a year ago, and you can see that he is trying to make a conscious effort to get to the best spots on the floor. And what that really means is he's trying to get in towards the rim or get shots outside the 3-point line. And that's made a big difference. And then meanwhile, Jason, can we talk about Karl Anthony Towns?
Yes, please.
I mean, is he the best big man in the league, Jason? I mean, with all due respect to Nikola Jokic and Anthony Davis, I mean, Towns is right there.
He's certainly playing his way up the list. I mean, he's in my top 5, but as good as Jokic is and Embiid and who else was the other guy you said? Anthony Davis. I mean, Towns is playing his way into that conversation. The issue with him is that, Davis, Jokic, and Embiid are all on title contenders, and Towns is stuck in the small market of the Twin Cities. So getting back to your point on Wiggins, I mean, I don't see that lasting. He hasn't shown that consistency over the course of his career. And, there's a large enough sample size to almost label him a bust. I mean, Wiggins outside shooting, I would not guard him all day. Just let him shoot because in the opener against the Nets, I mean, he was only really scoring when he was at his best slashing to the hoop. Towns and his three-point ability and what he's worked on in the offseason, now that's worth discussing because he
Yeah.
shoots threes top of the key, just butter. It's unbelievable to watch. So Towns is going to carry the Timberwolves, but I ultimately think while a lot of these Western Conference teams that struggled out the gate find their footing, I think we'll see the Wolves regress to the mean.
I mean, they have a long way to drop. I mean, right now, you mentioned Karl Anthony Towns from three-point land. He's shooting, Jason, I hope you're sitting down. He's shooting nearly 10 three-pointers a game, and he's hitting them at 52%, Jason. I mean, that's insane. That is insane volume. I'm going to pull up the team stats, but Karl Anthony Towns has probably made about as many three-pointers as some NBA teams have so far this year. So I think that kind of just gets to the heart of where they're at. And yeah, I do think that there's going to be some regression. What about the Spurs, Jason? Are you buying the Spurs and kind of the way that they've been playing?
Well, it's tough because, I think when the dust settles, the Spurs probably won't make the playoffs given how good the West is. But with the way the Warriors looked, and we'll get to them next, I mean, anything's possible. They just guaranteed LaMarcus Aldridge's salary for next season. So they're all in with this group. Murray's back. DeRozan's playing at a high level. The West is so good that DeRozan may be the best player in the conference to miss the All-Star team this year. That's how good the West is. But Popovich and company are doing their best to, quiet the naysayers like me, and they're playing well so far. But again, it's 1 week. That's why I can't label any of these teams as surprises or disappointments so far because it's so early. But, just like Minnesota, I mean, you have to like the way the Spurs have played out the gate. The question is, can they sustain it?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I'm really interested to see because I think one of the stories that we've really seen of this season, and I mentioned it before we started the show, is that when you look at the top of the standings, and there are a couple exceptions, one of the things that they share is having dynamic playmakers. And the Spurs are kind of bucking the trend in terms of that. I don't know if Deontay Murray or Derek White really qualify under that definition. And likewise, they also are just not doing the things that the kind of the NBA math tells you they should be. And that means things like shooting more threes and so on. On the other hand, Deontay Murray has been one of the top players in the league based on PER, which is obviously John Hollinger's rating for efficiency. That helps. So it's hard for me to say. I tend towards not being a believer in the Spurs team, but not being a believer, it still probably means they're going to make the playoffs, Jason. So we shall see. But let's move on to the other side of this coin, Jason, because while there have been a lot of good things, there's been a couple teams that have really, really struggled out of the gates. There's a couple we can kind of throw in here, but the two that jumped out to me, and I kind of want to get buy or sell from you on these, are the Pacers and the Warriors. So let's start with the Pacers. Are you buying the struggles of the Pacers or selling, meaning you think they will be good?
I'm buying. I mean, you knew they were going to struggle without Oladipo, and we were both gushing about the offseason they had, bringing in Jeremy Lamb to take some of the load off and all the veteran guys they have. They just re-signed Sabonis to a deal, and we talked about, potentially trading one of their big men. I think now it's Sabonis under contract long-term that Turner may be the odd man out there. But until Oladipo comes back, they're pretty much in no man's land. I mean, they're having trouble scoring. They're having trouble defending. And I know those sound like vanilla statements, but in order to win in the NBA, you have to score and you have to defend. So they need to right the ship and do it quickly because the East is not as bad as a lot of people pegged them to be coming into the season with previewing all the divisions and what the East is going to look like. So the Pacers dug themselves a slight early hole, and we'll have to see if they have the fortitude to climb out of it. So I'm buying.
I agree with you, and it's not like they've played world beaters. Now they're going to play the Nets, and that's going to be a really interesting game for these two teams because while it's early, I think both teams, for the Pacers, you don't want to get off to an 0-4 start. You're just digging yourself a little bit of a hole, And meanwhile, for the Nets, they've had some really bad luck, and we'll get to them in a minute, but you really want to kind of right the ship a little bit after some unlucky losses. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch those two teams because they're not must wins or anything. We're way too early in the season for anything like that. But for the Pacers, I think they have to show what they can do. I mean, the one guy who's been absolutely balling out, Jason, is Malcolm Brogdon, who I think had inspired some questions. And I mean, he's answered them, Jason. let's be clear. He has answered the questions. He's averaging 22 points a game, and he is right at the top of the leaderboard for assists. I mean, he's been something else, Jason. And meanwhile, Sabonis has been no slouch himself. Something to watch, though. Uh, the Pacers are playing their starters an awful lot of minutes, Jason. When you see the top four guys all over 35 minutes in today's NBA, that's a little surprising. So interesting to see how that goes, especially Brogdon, who's had a history of injuries. I would think that they're going to ease up. But let's go to the other team here, and that is, of course, Jason, the Golden State Warriors. If you know a basketball fan in your life, they're probably talking about the Warriors and the shocking fall from grace. They got absolutely drubbed by the Clippers in the opening game. The Thunder embarrassed them. And, I mean, I don't know how many screenshots I saw of the halftime score in that game where the Thunder were up 30 points on the Warriors. Um, it's been shocking to watch, Jason. I mean, a couple of these games have been over by half, which you used to be the reverse. They'd be over by half because the Warriors were winning, and then they'd pour it on in the third quarter. The defense has been positively atrocious. They salvaged a win against the Zion-less Pelicans. I mean, what do you make of this Warriors team? And, I mean, do we need to bail out of any chance of them making the playoffs?
Did you see the way that Steph Curry and D'Angelo Russell celebrated when they got their first win? I mean, dude, like, that's how far the Warriors have fallen from grace. And a lot of people have them on the outside looking into the playoffs. I mean, they don't have much on their roster at all, and that's being nice. You know, Draymond Green was never a focal point offensively. Yeah, he could pass the rock, but now he's going to be counted on to contribute in the regular season. Russell's integrating himself, you know, to a new team and has scored the ball early, but he's not a top-notch defender. And everyone thought, including you, that Steph Curry was going to go off and be this MVP candidate and do his thing, but he's showing that without, you know, guys to take the pressure off him like a Klay Thompson, like a Kevin Durant, he's struggling early. So I'm buying the Warriors too. I don't see how they're going to come out of this right now. They're hard capped. Bob Myers, I've been listening to a lot of NBA radio on Sirius XM because I just got a new Jeep and, you know, I have the free trial. And they did a full 3-hour preview leading up to the grand opening of the Chase Center. And Bob Myers said, look, like, this is our roster right now. You know, we'll get Klay back eventually, but we're hard capped. We cannot do anything until the offseason. And, you know, it's showing they're going to have to improve from within. They're going to have to get Burks back. They're going to have to get Cauley Stein in and have him contribute. I mean, Looney's going to have to play a bigger role than he has during the dynasty. It's a lot to ask of these young players surrounded by Steph Curry. So I think it's a tough uphill battle that these once mighty Warriors have to face for sure.
Yeah, there is a lot of Eric Paschall. There is a lot of Amari Spellman. There's a lot of Glenn Robinson III, Damian Lee, Marcus Chris. I mean, there's just a lot of guys who you just don't want to see. I mean, I will say it's great for me because Eric Paschall is from near my hometown, right where my cousins grew up, and Kai Bowman is a BC boy. So I'm loving that, but I'm not sure you want those guys in your NBA roster, Jason. And the amount of minutes some of these guys are playing. I mean, Jordan Poole is playing almost 24 minutes a game. He has a PER. This is not a misprint, Jason, of 1.27. Kai Bowman, proud former Eagle from Boston College, has a negative 6.26 PER, Jason. I honestly did not know that stat went into the negative. And that just speaks to how bad this team is after their top few guys. I mean, it's really tough. And you can cherry pick certain guys, but the truth is that I don't know if there's a plus defender on this team right now. I mean, Steph Curry has regressed at the early part of this season. He just, now that he has to really play a little bit more tight defense, he's really, really struggled, and teams are attacking him. And with that, it sort of feels like the only plus defender who's been playing for them is Draymond Green because Looney hasn't really been